Welcome to Waves, West Alabama, Voices Echoing Success, the podcast where local voices inspire big impact. Brought to you monthly by the Chamber of Commerce of West Alabama, this is your source for stories of leadership, innovation, and success.
And welcome back to another episode of Waves, the West Alabama Voices Echoing Success. Today we have the opportunity to bring in two guests with us this afternoon to discuss everything that's going on legislatively in the state of Alabama as the 2025 legislative session kicked off February 4th. With me here today, I have the chairman of our local delegation, Ms. Cynthia Almond. Ms. Cynthia, thank you for being with us today.
Glad to be here, Kyle.
Yeah. And also we have Representative Chris England with us as well. And Chris, we appreciate the opportunity to kind of go back and forth as like old days.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, this is something we discussed in the last episode. This podcast kind of came to fruition because of some conversations, Chris, that you and I both had with Jim back in the day. And an opportunity for us to talk about, kind of some of those issues that we often agree on, may not agree on the path to getting there, but, different than the folks at the federal level and what their constant back and forth and tug of war is. We have the opportunity to work across those political lines to get things done for our communities. And that's what brings us here today. So, thank you both for being willing to discuss some of those issues that are important to us here locally. And I think we can do a really good job of educating the public, but at the same time having some fun and making people understand what that working relationship looks like. So, with that, I think one of the things through the Chambers Drive-In last week, Anthony Latham at LSA came to talk to us, talked about 90% of the bills that come through the House and Senate at the state level are extremely bipartisan. A lot of those, the majority, maybe even pass without a dissenting vote. So maybe let's talk about a little bit of that and the camaraderie, the work relationship that both parties have at the state level that you may not see on the news every night.
Well, I think it's obvious. I think we all have the same aspirational goals in terms of like what we want the future of the state of Alabama to look like, and also how we want Alabama to be one of the best places that people can choose to live and grow and have a family. I think the differences most time come in how we get there. So we share the same aspirational goals, but process and policy kind of matter to get there. And I think most of the disagreements that you see are just on how we get to those places. But as you said, most times our conversations, the harder conversations, happen outside of the public eye, and by the time they reach the floor, not everybody's always happy with the outcome, but generally speaking, when everybody's upset, that means we probably worked out a good deal. So,
hear that a lot, right?
Yeah.
So it's really the art of how you negotiate and how you compromise that really gets things accomplished.
Yeah.
I would just add, you mentioned this at the outset, but certainly we sometimes have disagreement on a state level on a party ticket, not anything like on the federal level, but on a local level, it's rare that we have a disagreement about a local issue. As you know, we have a Tuscaloosa County legislative delegation because our county is large enough to have its own delegation, and that means whenever there is a bill of local import that only pertains to Tuscaloosa County, we have to meet as a delegation and vote on that issue before it can advance in the House or the Senate. So we do that, 3 or 4 times a year usually, and it's rare when we have any kind of split vote or disagreement about local issues.
When there's been some very impactful local legislation that comes out of that. You know, the one that comes to mind, obviously, from several years ago, HB 600 that created the Tuscaloosa County Road Improvement Commission that Chris and I both serve on right now, but you've been an integral part in as well. And we've been able to leverage local dollars to draw down state and federal dollars to make a huge impact in investment for local infrastructure projects. And that's something that will be felt for years and years and years to come here locally.
Yeah, and it was a huge example of, I still have the picture, to be honest with you, that every member of the city school board, the county school board, the county commission, the Tuscaloosa City Council, Northport City Council, and the entire legislative delegation we had a picture that we took the day that the bill passed, and we were all here celebrating, you know, like a community win that hadn't necessarily borne the fruit that we initially anticipated, especially with certain road projects that we can talk about. But overall, I can't think of a piece of legislation that has moved the county forward, especially as quickly as that bill has, concerning, you know, funding, and creating opportunities, opening up roadways. We have definitely identified solutions and had the money to pay for them. In my district, especially in 69 South, you know, we're still working on getting that overpass done, but the road widening, we went from 2 lanes to 3 lanes, substantially changed the trajectory of the area and how we move traffic there. So, I mean, in your area, McWright's Ferry Road, I mean, it's a project that that the Road Improvement Commission paid for and is helping to pay for, and it's going to transform a good portion of the 35406 zip code. So, I mean, I think that's been transformational.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, it just goes to show, you know, some of those meetings back and when we were leading up to the passage of that piece of legislation, some of those got a little bit hairy at times.
They did.
But that's what it's all about, right? When we came out of those meetings, we were all united in the effort that we wanted to move forward, and to me, that's how we get things done. We can have all the fights we want to behind closed doors, but when we come out, we need to be united in what we're doing as a group. So thank you both for your input and help in making that come to fruition, because the impacts, again, are going to be seen for years. The next thing that I want to talk about, local education has been a huge topic of conversation. Couple of failed referendums over the last couple of years, but just the kind of the landscape of how education is delivered, the changes that are taking place both at the federal, state, and local levels are going to have impacts. The state is going through a process by which they're kind of studying what education funding should look like. We've been kind of stuck in an antiquated system, some might say, for 30 years, and kind of reevaluating what that funding model should look like going forward. So, Cynthia, do you mind kind of giving us some insight on what those conversations look like, what those local impacts could be, and those kinds of things?
Sure. So, yes, I sit in the House on the Education Budget Committee, and there's the equivalent committee in the Senate. And since we finished the last session in May of last year, we have been meeting all summer and fall to discuss and take in information about this potential new funding model that you've just spoken about. We have been doing what we call the foundation program in our state for the last 35 years, which is basically a per pupil funding model, where if a school has 1,000 students, they get a certain amount of money per pupil, and that's how we allocate resources. There is some additional resource allocation above that, but it's pretty minimal. What other states have done, probably in light of federal mandates that have come down mostly, where we have certain requirements that we have to meet, schools have to meet for special ed students or disabled students. poverty, students in poverty, English language learners, those types of categories, even gifted or rural. Those are two other categories that are sometimes in there. They have gone to a model where um, they the money follows the student, and so if there are those students in that school, the school gets extra money for those students, and that is what we probably that's what we're trying to move towards. We had a meeting yesterday, and we came out of the meeting with the recommendation that we would adopt a hybrid model, which is basically keeping the foundation program, but trying to add those extra resources based upon the students who are in the school.
Kind of layer
Layered.
it on top,
That's right. That's right. It was a lot to undergo all at once. It's very complicated, but I think that the end result will be, first of all, our goal is to have no losers. In other words, no school district will lose money. And so what does that mean? That means we're putting more money into public education. This is K through 12 that we're talking about. So in my view, that's a good thing. This data bears out that if you spend more money on public education, you get better results. And so we want better results, and we've got to be willing to put in the money. So,
well, and speaking of results, you know, the NAEP scores at the national level just came out. Alabama moved from,
yes.
2019 levels that we probably not too proud of, but we're 52nd, both in reading and in math, at the fourth grade level to this year, up to 36th and 39th, if I'm not mistaken, respectively, in those two subjects. And really, we're only one of two states in the entire country that surpassed pre-pandemic levels in their scoring of those two subjects at the fourth grade level. So a lot of moving parts on that. Chris, I know you've been super, about beating the drum locally for school funding and those kinds of things. And we understand the challenges that they have, and especially coming out of the pandemic, the educational environment is so much different than it was, the learning environment so much different than it was 5 years ago. It's taken some additional resources, but learning to educate in an entirely new way.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we're having this conversation, and you mentioned it's been 35 years, right?
Right.
When we recognize that students' needs have evolved, the way we have to, educate children has evolved, but the way we fund school hasn't. So we recognize that you may have two similarly situated students that require different ways to educate them, and they're going to require different resources. So the fact that we're even exploring this is, revolutionary in terms of education funding from where we started years ago to where we are now, recognizing that it's time that we do something different.
Right.
And locally here, I think we have our own challenges. I think, when you mentioned earlier on that we've had two failed referendums, the fact that we don't have additional revenue doesn't mean that we're not going to have additional needs. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to use the resources that we have in the best ways possible, especially considering that there isn't any new revenue coming. So, without being confrontational or throwing anybody under the bus, I think all of us, whether it be city council, county commission, legislative delegation, and the county school boards and the city school boards, are going to have to get creative with the resources that we have in order to meet the new needs that we have, especially considering that we don't have the federal money that we used to have. So recognizing that local costs are growing, I think in the next couple of years we're going to have to sit down and have a real hard conversation about, are we effectively and efficiently using the resources that we have available to us to best meet the needs of the kids in our county?
Yeah, and especially as those state receipts kind of flatten out post-pandemic, there's not that influx of cash and resources from the federal government as there was for a period of time. I think this past budget cycle, current budget cycle that we're in, is the last budget cycle that will see a lot of those dollars be invested locally. And so it's important, the education budget has continued to grow at the state level, but the needs are growing right there alongside it. So it's something to be very interested in here locally. Some of this needs-based funding model, conversation would show that here locally, both in the city and county systems, they would benefit from a change in the model. And so, generally you think of that as impoverished are going to have more special needs and disabled populations. Your rural issues are still going to be there. One of the things in Tuscaloosa County that I think baffles everybody is transportation costs.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, geographically the second largest county in the entire state, and it with that brings a whole new set of issues that a lot of people don't have to struggle with.
It's definitely. You don't think about how large this county is until you drive across it, and then you find out that there are students that may go on 15 to 20-minute bus rides to come from their neighborhood to their school, and it's a substantial cost to the county. And I think one thing that we need to make sure that the average Alabama citizen understands is that there is the state, and they bear some responsibility, but the local governments also supplement some of those costs too. And one of those costs they supplement are transportation, paying for gas, paying for employees to get a kid from point A to point B, and that is a massive undertaking.
Yeah, and in other places that they don't see that burden because it's you go to a small city system across the state, and longest bus route they may have is 2 miles, and so that's where we see the discrepancies in how those funds kind of apply at the local level. Yeah. But anyway, what seems like is going to be the big theme of the legislative session this year is public safety. I know there's a package of bills dealing with crime, and we've seen our share locally. Can you tell me about kind of what that's looking like as we move through the session?
So there is a package of bills that it came from the governor's office, and the Speaker Ledbetter is also very supportive and involved in this. I don't know how many bills are there, Chris?
I think it was 6.
6 sounds right. 6. I think about half of them started in the Senate, and the other half are starting in the House. I am a sponsor for one of the bills that started in the Senate. Senator Barfoot has it upstairs, and it originally was a bill I introduced 2 years ago with the help of our District Attorney Hayes Webb, the District Attorney Association, the police, and now the Big Ten Mayors Association is supportive of it, and that is basically adopting the federal law in Alabama that if you are a felon, you cannot possess a gun, which is the law in Alabama, also because the federal law applies to Alabama. The problem that we have on the streets is that our law just sort of handcuffs our local law enforcement. It's not that these people aren't out there committing crimes and being stopped, but our local people cannot arrest them, and that's a problem for our police. So, and it's a problem for us, and consequently, so that's a part of one of the bill I'm carrying. That has been changed significantly already in the Senate. So I don't know what it's going to look like, if I'll even recognize it by the time it gets to the House.
We say that a lot.
Yeah, and that does happen a lot, and it's important for people to understand what gets introduced and what we actually end up voting on, or sometimes 2 very different bills. So.
As an aside, I think it's important for folks to know that once you introduce a bill, it doesn't belong to the sponsor anymore. It belongs to the body.
That's right.
Yep.
So if the body decides that there are components of your bill that they don't like, it can be taken out.
Yeah.
Or things can be added, but it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs
except
to everybody.
You can withdraw it, I guess.
Eventually, if it just gets beaten up unrecognizable, you can say I just don't want anything to do with it anymore.
Right.
But the core concept here is once the bill is introduced, it belongs to the body.
That's right.
So when we've got a package of bills, and the governor has again goals. Those goals are captured in legislation. But once she sends it to 140 people, there's no telling what it's going to look like when you get finished. So we've got Cynthia, you've got that bill you just discussed, and there's a bill about creating police officer and extending the amount of immunity and protection they have on their day-to-day job and their discretionary functions. And they've got another bill that deals with juveniles and guns, and just a series of bills that address different components of the overall problem. And again, it's like what this conversation we started, we all have the same aspirational goal about doing something about crime, but obviously the devil's in the details and trying to compromise to make sure, like, for example, if you're offering immunity to police officers, you want to capture the discretionary functions, but you also don't want to create cover for those bad officers to get away with things that we all agree are objectionable. So trying to massage the language to make sure that we're not covering bad actors, but at the same time protecting good ones, that's when it gets kind of difficult. But again, we share the same goals in terms of creating a better environment, because, if there's crime in your area, it makes it harder for businesses to thrive. People don't want to live there. It affects the bottom line. So it's a common goal there that we're doing the best that we can do to address those issues. So, people can be comfortable going to different areas and not have to worry about, being victimized in some way. So I think by the time the session is over with, you'll see several bills that will pass that will, kind of move us down that road a little bit. But as you know, it's really hard to get a bill through the legislative process, as it should be. Yep. And I think you'll see that result at some point in the very near future. There will be bills that are passed, but we'll probably all not be happy with them, which means they're probably pretty good.
Yeah, that's kind of been the theme for a long time, is like, if both sides are not very happy about what a piece of legislation looks like, you've probably done your job, right?
Yeah. Right. That's right.
And there's advocates on both sides, and nobody can get everything that they want, generally speaking. And also, talking about how tough that legislative process is, and I know some of these numbers have come down, but over the years, generally speaking, 2,000-ish pieces of legislation get introduced, and only about 200 of those go through all 6 steps to become law. Yeah. So it's a high threshold, and it's a high threshold for a reason.
And it should be, because good politics often create bad policy.
So true.
That's a good way to put it, no doubt. One other topic that I want to get into that a lot of our constituents around the state have been interested in for a long time is gaming. Gaming conversation got very close to the finish line last year and couldn't quite get over the hump. I know you guys in the House spent a heck of a lot of time, effort, and energy on that. The public, I think, became more educated about some of those issues, but I want to get into some of the finer details of why it is so complicated. Generally speaking, you see polling numbers for a lottery that are in the 85, almost 90% range of public support, but it's hard to get across, and satisfy all the needs and what that could trigger through other avenues of gaming. So, Chris, if you don't mind, just kind of give us a little bit of a idea of what those complications look like.
Well, if we're going to do it, the whole goal is to make money for the state, right? And to create revenue, because we desperately need it for several reasons. So if we're going to engage in it, we have to determine the best way to do it, first and foremost, long-term, legally, and also for us to be lucrative. So that means if we had just adopted a lottery, for example, the area around us is saturated. Every state around us has a lottery now. So whether or not we set the goal of say $200 million. If we have a lottery, if we can actually reach that, probably likely not. So if we adopted just a lottery, what we would do is open up the opportunity for Porch Creek to do other forms of gaming. But for us, Porch Creek doing other forms of gaming on their reservation means that we can't tax it. We don't get any money from it. So if we don't engage in other forms of gambling, that means we're not doing it in the way that makes us the most money or creates the most revenue. As a matter of fact, if we just passed a lottery, we would likely give them a monopoly over all other forms of gaming in the state of Alabama, which means that we would substantially lose money, especially considering all of our direct competitors are doing all other forms of gaming. So it can't be just as simple as saying pass a lottery and that's it, because, again, we're putting ourselves at a significant disadvantage with our competition out of state and our competition within the state. So I've always said, because I'm not a big gambler, I don't have enough money to gamble. And I've always said if we're going to do it, we need to go as far as we can so we can make it worth our while, generate enough revenue to be competitive, and also generate enough revenue to close some of those loopholes or close some of those issues that we have in our general fund, including Medicaid, prisons, and so forth. So with that, I think you'll hear it a lot, pass a simple lottery bill, but it's never really ever been that simple. And I think it might actually be a bad idea for us to do it practically because it'll never pass through the legislature, as you know, but also revenue-wise, it just won't generate enough money to make it worth this, that orange ain't worth the squeeze at that point.
Well, and I think to your point, if you really just kind of peel back the layers of that orange, and get down to the nuts and bolts of what that revenue would look like, one of the things that I've struggled with over the years is, and I have no moral objection to gaming at all, but the thing that I do struggle with is a lot of the public sentiment thinks it's going to fix, a lot of state government. But if you pass a lottery kind of in a silo, and expect that $200 million worth of revenue to come in, and we want to set up education funds for every child to go to school like we see in Georgia and Tennessee, and, do all of these other things, fix Medicaid and prisons. I mean, $200 million out of a $9.2 billion education budget, not general fund and education, but that isn't even a rounding error.
No.
And I'm afraid of the expectations that we are setting for our constituents in that, okay, we're going to pass a gaming bill, lottery bill, whatever, and we're going to raise all this money, and we're going to be able to fix mental health, DHR, all of these things. And the real nuts and bolts of it is, it's not a ton of revenue. Is it a zero-sum game? Yes. It's more than nothing. We're losing that revenue to surrounding states, but is it a silver bullet? Absolutely not. I think the bigger thing is, in order for us to address other revenue sources, we've got to get past it. And allow the people to have a say in it for the first time since 2001.
And I just want to stress, the House did that last year, okay? Twice. We've done, twice.
Yes, we did.
And got down to the last day, and the sponsor of the bill killed it. So I think we've done our due diligence in this point, and it was a comprehensive package too. That took a lot of sacrifice. It took a lot of compromise. It took a lot of work. So if we see anything in the very near future about gambling, I think it should come from the Senate, and they send it to us to work with whatever they send us, because at this point we spent a lot of political capital to get what we got last year, and it was all wasted for nothing.
Do you think we'll see it this year, Chris?
I think so, because there's still some conversation around it, and the new Senate Pro Tem, brought it up out of nowhere again, because I think there are certain realities out there regarding both the general fund and the education trust fund, And our good friend Senator Singleton says it all the time. At some point, the money's going to drive the conversation. And I think we're getting to that point.
Well, listen, as we wrap here today, I want to thank you both for your friendship. It was an honor for me to serve with you guys, but it's comforting to know that we've got good people serving our area and our delegation here locally. And
Kyle, I got to tell you, I didn't know what we were going to do without you.
I think you're doing quite okay, buddy.
We're barely getting by.
And if you ever need any input, I'm here. Okay.
We know that.
But we certainly respect the job that you guys do in Montgomery. It's a huge sacrifice for you and your families, and we appreciate that relationship that we can have with the chamber and advocating on behalf of our local businesses and our constituency that we have at the chamber membership. So thank you for that. We could go on and on. There's topics that we didn't get to today.
We're just getting warmed up.
But I do want to say, though, we appreciate the relationship that we also have with the chamber, that we have a voice that we can trust to know that when you relay a message to us from the business community, that it's something that we can run with and not have to second guess. I mean, that is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that goes both ways, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a working relationship that it takes two partners. Here on this Valentine's Day, it takes two partners. Yes. Both of you showed up in your Valentine's Day colors, and here I am, grayed out. But anyway, thank you again. We greatly appreciate the partnership that we have with you guys, and look forward to making future investment in our local communities to make it more successful.
Yep.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us on Waves, West Alabama Voices Echoing Success, the official podcast of the Chamber of Commerce of West Alabama. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in next month as we continue to amplify the voices shaping the future of West Alabama. For more stories and updates, visit us online at westalabamachamber.com or follow us on social media. Until next time, keep making waves.
Alabama One, a partner of West Alabama Chamber, offers a full suite of financial products, including checking and savings accounts, personal loans for home, auto, and recreational vehicles, as well as land and equipment financing. Go to alabama1.org/what's your one to learn more. Equal housing opportunity.